Hours after telling reporters he doubted Iran was worthy of making a deal, President Trump declared the US-Iran ceasefire over. Within the same day, American forces had struck roughly 90 targets across Iran. Iran fired back at US bases in 3 Gulf states. And for the first time in this conflict, missiles crossed into a fourth country's airspace. This is how a fragile peace, signed just weeks earlier, came apart, and what it means for the region and for the world's oil supply. It started on paper with a peace deal. Back in June 2026, the United States and Iran signed a memorandum of understanding meant to close out a war that began in February, when a joint American-Israeli operation killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The agreement promised eased sanctions, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and a 60-day path toward a lasting settlement. For a moment, after 5 brutal weeks of fighting, it looked like the region might actually get some peace. That peace didn't last. Here's what we know for certain. In early July, commercial ships were attacked in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil normally flows. The United States and Gulf allies attributed the attacks to Iran. In response, President Trump, speaking at the NATO summit in Ankara, said he now considered the ceasefire over, calling further negotiations a quote-quote waste of time in comments to reporters. The US military then launched 2 consecutive nights of strikes, first around 80 targets, then roughly 90 more, hitting Iranian air defenses, coastal surveillance sites, missile and drone storage facilities, and naval infrastructure. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed retaliatory strikes on US positions in Kuwait and Bahrain, and Iranian officials said a base in Qatar was also targeted. Then, for the first time in this round of fighting, Iranian missiles breached the airspace of Jordan, a country not previously part of the exchange. Jordan's military said every missile was intercepted, with no casualties. Now let's move from what's confirmed to what analysts are saying about why this happened. Several defense analysts, including a former director at the U.S. Pacific Command's Joint Intelligence Center, have pointed to a structural problem with the ceasefire from the start. The Iranian government that signed the deal doesn't have full command authority over the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the force that actually controls Iran's missile arsenal and answers directly to Iran's supreme leadership. If that assessment is accurate, it would help explain why a signed agreement on paper didn't translate into an actual halt in hostilities on the ground. The economic consequences are already measurable. U.S. gas prices jumped 5 cents a gallon in a single day, the sharpest one-day increase since early May, after months of prices falling. Oil futures climbed for a second straight day. Iran, meanwhile, appears to be moving quickly to get its own tankers clear of the strait, based on shipping tracker data, even as it continues to assert control over who passes through. Militarily, the picture right now shows an escalation that's broader than the original war, but not yet as intense. U.S. strikes are concentrated on coastal and infrastructure targets, rather than the deep nationwide bombing campaign seen in February. Iran's retaliation has spread geographically, 3 Gulf states plus, now, Jordanian airspace. But independent military analysts say the Guard Corps' actual ability to threaten shipping in Hormuz doesn't appear to have been significantly degraded by the latest strikes. Internationally, reactions have split along familiar lines. NATO's Secretary General backed the American strikes as necessary, and the alliance's summit declaration reaffirmed that an attack on one member is an attack on all language directly relevant given U.S. bases now under fire in the Gulf. Iran's foreign ministry condemned the strikes as targeting civilian infrastructure, specifically citing damage to railway bridges near the city of Mashhad, where Khamenei's funeral procession was underway at the time. Iranian officials have publicly warned that further American strikes would be met with what one parliamentary spokesperson called a forthcoming, quote, hard slap. So where does this go from here? This next part is analysis, not confirmed fact. One scenario. This is a severe but temporary flare-up, similar to earlier moments in this on-and-off conflict, that eventually cools once both sides weigh the costs of sustained escalation. Trump himself has suggested Iran remains eager for a deal, despite the fighting, even as he's questioned whether Tehran would actually honor one. A second scenario is more concerning. If the Revolutionary Guard Corps was never fully bound by the ceasefire in the first place, strikes alone may not change its behavior in the strait, meaning this cycle could continue regardless of diplomatic efforts. A third scenario involves further regional spillover. Jordan's intercepted missiles mark the first breach of a third country's airspace in this round, and if that pattern continues, more nations and alliances could be drawn in. What we can say with confidence is this: 3 weeks ago, this war looked like it was ending. Today, Roughly 170 strikes have been exchanged in under 48 hours, a fourth country's airspace has been breached, and the Strait of Hormuz, carrier of a fifth of the world's oil, remains the single most volatile flashpoint in the region. Whether this settles back into an uneasy truce or escalates further isn't something any analyst can say with certainty right now. What matters is watching what happens at that strait over the coming days, because that's likely where the next signal will come from.